Hi, everyone. Welcome to Product Vetting, BuildingGreen's Top 10 Tips. We have a lot more than top 10 things to share with you today. And I'm here with Hicks, Harney, who's going to take it away and tell us about herself.
Hi, my name is Hicks, Harney. I started a business, BuildingGreen's Specs, about a year and a half ago. I am focused on specification writing, architectural specification writing, and product selection assistance and guidance. And I am a licensed architect. I have been practicing for various firms for over 30 years.
Thank you, Anne. And this is Nadav Malin. I'm here with Building Green. I'm president of Building Green. I work with a lot of our clients and customers around trainings, information, and product vetting for projects, as well as workshop facilitation. A couple of housekeeping reminders or announcements before we get started. We will hopefully have some time for questions throughout this. Actually, we'll hold questions towards the end. We may take a few along the way, depending on how it goes. So use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel to submit questions if you have them, and we will get to as many as we can. And also, you should know this webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be sent to you by email afterwards, assuming the technology gods smile on us. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. And I'm going to start with the bad news. It's no secret that we've got ecological crises bearing down on us, a whole number of them in different ways. Global temperatures, for example, are almost literally spiraling out of control, as this amazing graphic representation illustrates. And the implications of this show up differently in different places. If anyone's calling in from Colorado, you may be suffering from the impacts of the horrible fires going on there. Really sorry about that. Seems like there's always something terrible going on somewhere, and more often, climate change is either a contributing factor or a factor making things worse. This is sort of the pattern we're seeing these days, is the climate is changing rapidly, and things that we used to happen even before are now happening more, faster, bigger, in ways that we weren't necessarily prepared for. And so really is happening all over the country, and there's very few parts of the US at least that are safe from one or multiple versions of these threats. And the threats are not just actual natural disasters and immediate physical harm, like drowning in a flood or getting injured, burned in a fire, but there are health impacts that are coming from all of these changes as well, whether it's disease vectors that are moving, whether it's extreme temperatures in areas where people were not used to those, or ozone impacts due to changing temperatures. All of these things are affecting air quality, affecting health in a whole bunch of different ways. And it all has to do with the fact that the kind of change that used to happen in geologic time over thousands and tens of thousands and millions of years is now suddenly happening within the span of a few years and decades. And our ecosystems and our bodies are having trouble keeping up. So that's the bad news. The good news is that there's a lot that building materials have to do with both the causes and the opportunities for improvement in this world. And I like to think of the opportunities here in these four quadrants. I'm going to go into detail in each of these and just explain what's covered by each of these. Because if you cover all four of these, you pretty much are doing whatever can be done with materials to address human health and ecological and social impacts. So life cycle assessment really focuses on energy, carbon, emissions to air and water. And within LEED version 4, it's picked up through whole building LCA, whole building life cycle assessment, and environmental product declarations, which are a key part of what we're going to talk about here in terms of LEED v4 and product opportunities. So these are the impact categories that EPDs cover. We're not going to go into detail about all of that right now, but there's more where that came from. One of the interesting patterns that you see as you look at this is we're often talking about carbon or climate change, carbon as a proxy or as a stand-in for climate change impacts more broadly. And in fact, in most cases, carbon or climate change impacts work as a proxy for all these other environmental impacts that are covered by life cycle assessment as well. So carbon works pretty well. Sometimes we interchangeably talk about carbon, talk about LCA impacts, and it's not an exact one-for-one match, but generally they track pretty closely, which is handy. Now, it used to be that we didn't think that much about building materials in terms of climate change and carbon impacts, because we thought, well, the big story, the real issue is in operating energy and the fuels that are burned to operate our buildings. But that's no longer the case for a couple of reasons. Primarily because buildings are getting more efficient, and especially if you're watching this webinar, you're probably tied into the green building space, where leaders in this space are driving towards net zero buildings. As we drive that operating energy use down further and further, the embodied energy piece, it hasn't changed, that looms larger as a part of the overall puzzle. Actually, in some cases, it has changed, right? Because in order to drive operational energy down, usually we're adding layers of insulation. In order to add more insulation, we're adding framing, we're thickening up the envelope, we're adding photovoltaic panels, we're changing up systems. So in fact, in a lot of cases, we're actually growing that embodied energy piece in order to shrink the operating energy. And we have to pay attention to the trade-off there, because we need to cover both. Embodied energy is important not just because it's the piece that's left over after we drive down operating energy, but also because there's a time factor here. The embodied energy is all about energy that's in products and materials that go into a building. All of that carbon is released right up front. It's released right in that time when we're building the building, which means there's a huge plume of carbon happening right then, as opposed to the operating energy, which is released gradually over the life of the building. And that's significant because in addition to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, what's important is how long it's in the atmosphere. And so carbon that's emitted now is actually a much bigger problem than carbon emitted 10 or 20 or 50 years from now. So for both those reasons, embodied energy and carbon, huge, huge issue. Looking next to habitat and biodiversity, it's kind of self-explanatory, ecosystem impacts, natural flows. This is really covered primarily in LEED under the raw material extraction credit. And just as an example, obviously large clear cuts are a huge impact on biodiversity in that particular ecosystem, disruptive to habitat. We're seeing tremendous extinction across the planet. That's a combination of habitat loss and climate change impacts all together. And so this is one piece of that puzzle. And again, for materials that are coming from places where biodiversity, that are rich in biodiversity, this is definitely something to pay attention to wherever we're working. Moving on to health. As I mentioned, health is tied to climate change, but also more directly tied to building materials through hazardous substances that might in those materials. And depending on the system or the program, sometimes we're also paying attention to exposure. So in LEED version 4, there's a credit on material ingredients, and there's low emitting materials as a credit in the indoor environmental quality section, which is where health is the focus as well. And so this is where it's useful to think about what are the ways that potentially harmful substances can move from building materials into our bodies. And so breathing them is big, ingesting them, especially toddlers playing on a carpet or chewing on a windowsill, right, with lead poisoning, and just through your skin, these materials can come in. So paying attention to how these things are then released into the environment from all these different sources, and then how they can get absorbed or ingested into humans for those direct human health impacts is a key piece of what we're looking at in terms of these materials. So this is just a master sort of overview of where some of these hazards are found in building materials. And you can look at them also in terms of categories. What are these categories of hazards, and what are the effects each of them might have, as well as where they show up in buildings and how to avoid them. So that's the context in terms of the health piece of what we're looking at. The final quadrant of these four that we're using to frame this whole picture is the story of social equity. And so this is where we're considering things like fair labor practices, like, what are workers exposed to and how well are they protected, and what about corruption and that kind of thing in the workplace. LEED version 4 doesn't actually have a credit that addresses this in the core rating system, but there are a series of pilot credits around social equity, including one that's specifically about social equity in the supply chain, which is, of course, the supply chain is the materials and product supply chain. So strongly encourage you to take a look at that as a way to start to think about this whole social equity piece of these issues and where they come from, because there are huge, just in the same way as there are ecological impacts to the materials we use, there are social impacts to these materials and where they come from. And it's important to think about those and try to get a handle on how can we work with and pay attention to and then mitigate those as we look at these material choices. So these are the 4 quadrants that cover the big picture in terms of all the impacts that you really need to think about as you're looking to optimize materials from an environmental and health perspective. In terms of what we can do about that now, our material selection process is really driven largely, for a lot of people at least, by programs like LEED. So let's take a look at how LEED has evolved. Started out as a pilot in 1998, moved into a full rating system in 2000, and through all of the 2000s and into about 2013 with LEED version 2 and then LEED 2009 or V3, the materials and resources credits really didn't change very much. Through that time, we also had a whole bunch of additional market sector specific and variants on LEED introduced. So all of that's very much part of the mix as well. But throughout that entire initial decade and a half of LEED, in terms of products and materials, we were pretty much focused on recycled content and certified wood and regional materials and maybe rapidly renewable materials. With LEED version 4, all of that has changed. Now we have this kind of alphabet soup of new terms and concepts and things to think about. Life cycle assessment, environmental product declarations, health product declarations. That's what we're going to be going into some more detail here as we continue with this program. And so the particular credits in LEED that cover these, there's 3 that fall under that umbrella of building product disclosure and optimization. That's the environmental product declarations, sourcing of raw materials, and then material ingredients. Those are the 3 BPDO credits. And then within indoor environmental quality, the low emitting materials credit is very much a part of this mix as well. And these are the credits that you have to pay attention to as you're looking to use the LEED version 4 as a program. As it turns out, these credits are not all created equal in terms of how easy they are to achieve. So we at Building Green created this cheat sheet to help guide you through this. And what you'll see here is each of those BPDO credits, the building product disclosure and optimization, are a column here. So environmental product declarations, this first column, raw material extraction, the middle column, and material ingredients, the last one. And each of those credits have 2 points, one for disclosure and one for optimization. But when you look at what you have to actually achieve in order to earn those points, there's some low-hanging fruit here. There's some relatively easy credits to achieve around disclosure for EPDs and disclosure for material ingredients, and also in the area of optimization for raw material extraction. So some pretty achievable targets there. Where there's some serious challenges is in the optimization point for EPDs, the optimization point for material ingredients. And the disclosure point, in fact, it's a little counterintuitive, but the disclosure point for raw material extraction is really not achievable because the reporting that you're supposed to use in order to achieve that point is not actually set up to do what the credit needs it to do right now. So we're going to walk you through the credits that are relatively easy to achieve in LEED and show you just how an approach to how easy that can be to do. But I also want to point out that LEED is not the only game in town. There's other programs that are really offering great guidance in terms of products and materials choices. So the Red List from the Living Building Challenge has guided a lot of, especially the really advanced and the more progressive owners, clients, and designers. And so essentially the Red List is a list of substances that are found in building products that you need to avoid in your project. Living Building Challenge has other material-related imperatives as well, things like certified wood, things like the distance, right, for where these things come from. All of that is part of the equation as well. So there's a great framework there. We're not going to go into as much detail about that, but very much a part of the mix in terms of the overall product vetting challenge. And then another rating system that has been getting a lot of attention the last few years is WELL. And what's interesting here is that until last week, WELL did not have a materials category. It had a smattering of materials-related features. So things that are called credits in LEED are called features in WELL. Had a smattering of materials features scattered throughout the different categories or concepts in WELL, in particular air and mind. Now, WELL version 2 just came out in pilot last week, and lo and behold, there's now a materials concept in WELL. And so they've consolidated all those materials-related features, whether they're preconditions that you have to meet or optional credits. And a lot of these do track pretty closely with things that are already in LEED. Some of them tie into Living Building Challenge, but there are also some variances there that you need to pay attention to. So stay tuned as we work to figure all this out. And just want to make the point that we have to work on this together, right? This is the kind of thing where the crowdsourcing and collaboration goes a long way. If we take this us versus them approach to addressing these challenges and solving these problems, we're not going to get as far. So with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Anne to walk us through some specifics on getting to 20 products for those easy LEED credits.
We wanted to cover next the sort of how-to, and we wanted to help you guys build a strategy for putting this together. And we start with all the places to look, which obviously there's a ton of places to look, and we don't have time to look at 7 or 8 different online databases to find whatever it is we're looking for specifically to choose a product. So what I'm a really big believer in is building up base documents and just setting up strategies for success that mean you don't have to do the same work over and over and over again. What I wanted to cover was 2 credits specifically. There are 3 LEED BPDO credits, and the middle one is the sourcing credit, and that is where all of the recycled regional FSC, that's where all that stuff is sort of landed, and that's just a question of keeping track during the construction process and then somebody doing a relatively complicated math problem to make sure that you can meet that credit. But the disclosure credits, the other 2, the first one is the environmental disclosure, and that requires that you get EPDs, environmental product declarations. And the second disclosure credit is material ingredients, and that requires an approved disclosure document. What we're going to talk about mainly in material ingredients are 3 documents. Those would be declare labels, HPDs, which are health product documents, health product disclosures, and cradle-to-cradle certification. That's where most of the information is. There's other places you can look, like manufacturer's inventory, but that right now is where most of the information lands. I want to start, I'm going to try to cover a couple of product types, and as a way of just showing as an example of how you can go about analyzing this. And I'm choosing 3 products that are pretty boring. I'm going to talk about mainly metal stud, gypsum board, and insulation. And one of the reasons I'm choosing those is those are 3 products that I'm usually not going to have disagreements with architectural teams about exactly which product they want to use. Typically, nobody has a preference for metal stud manufacturer, but typically metal studs are in every single project we do. So we'll start with metal stud. And also metal stud are thought leaders. The organization, their trade organization, put together a product category rule, or a PCR, that enabled them to do a generic industry-wide EPD. That happened in about 2015. And about 4 or 5 manufacturers quickly followed, and they did a product-specific EPD, which means for the category of metal stud, you can put 4 manufacturers to your spec. You can stop at 4, and you will guarantee yourself qualification for this credit. But more interestingly, the EPD for metal stud doesn't just cover studs. It covers the studs, the tracks, various extra things like headers, joists. It covers the CH stud, which is used in a shaft wall system. It covers drywall corner bead. It covers plaster lath. It covers clips. It covers connectors. So there's a good chance that you're going to get you're going to hit your limit on manufacturer in this category because you're going to have studs and headers and drywall bead in every single job that you do. So you're probably going to get to 5 of manufacturer X in the metal stud category, and then you can't use any more because you're limited to 5 per manufacturer in the LEED rating system. So disclosure in metal stud is a yes, and it's going to come with 5. If we talk about optimization, this is the guts of the EPD that's the generic EPD, and we could spend a lot of time talking about the specifics from various manufacturers, but here's what I learned. I compared 4. 2 of them were actually worse than the generic, which I didn't realize was possible, that it was physically possible to be worse than generic, but apparently it is. And 2 of them were better than the generic, but not better enough in 3 categories, which is what's required by the LEED optimization credit. So the short version of all this is, if you want to talk about optimizing from an environmental standpoint, when you're talking about things like metal studs, you should be talking about running a whole building life cycle analysis. And that's not a credit we're talking about today, but that is something we should all be doing regardless. The second topic in disclosure in LEED is material ingredients. In the category of metal studs, there are a number of manufacturers that have HPDs for metal studs. And again, these HPDs don't just cover the stud, they cover the tracks, the clips, the drywall beads. So these things, when you see one, you have to remember, oh, this covers multiple products. So again, in terms of disclosure on metal studs, that's going to be a yes, and then you're going to get multiple products out of that. But it was really interesting when I looked at this, because some of them are, this one is disclosed to 1,000 ppm. In the top left of the screen under content inventory, you see 1,000 ppm is checked. This one is disclosed to 100 ppm. That's under the Y in the word summary on that screen. And if you look at the list of products that are in these, in the 1,000 ppm one, all you see is hot dip galvanized steel, which consists of steel and zinc. In the 100 ppm, you see a long list of materials. Now, the thing to remember is 1,000 ppm is a disclosure level that is at a higher altitude. You see less. 100 ppm digs you far deeper, gets you more information. So the easy thing to remember is the smaller the number, the more information that you get. But I wanted to look more specifically at this, and I just wanted, before I did that, I wanted to make sure everyone had a basic understanding. All these things have an LT1 or to LT4 or LT-UNK. LT1 is the worst, very hazardous, avoid, and these are green screen list translator. LT stands for list translator, and then LT4 is inherently low hazard. LT-UNK is unknown hazard, don't know enough. All right, so if we take a look at the more specifics of this document, you'll see that steel, under the second column from the left, says no GS. That means no green screen. So steel is an innocuous product. The zinc, however, is an LTP1, which, because it's an endocrine disruptor and a couple other things, which means that out of the gate, metal stud will not meet the criteria for optimization under LEED v4. You need to have no LT1s in your product. What was interesting about this, though, was when you dug into the 100 ppm, there were so many more things. And this was the one that really got to me, chromium oxide. So chromium oxide is an LT1, and as you can see, it has pretty much every toxin known to man. It has a mammalian toxin, it's carcinogen. It's an aquatic toxin, it's developmental toxin, it's reproductive toxin for both boys and for girls, and it goes on and on. There are 3 pages of this thing for just one chemical. And then you get to the end summary, which is products produced by MBA are classified as non-hazardous per OSHA. Processes such as cutting, welding, or brazing to modify or install the product can result in hazardous and/or combustible dust or fumes. So I guess our takeaway from this is truly it's okay to purchase metal stud and have them delivered to your job site, but you probably shouldn't install them because that will produce hazardous and/or combustible dust or fume. So I joke a little bit, but generally under metal stud, we should be thankful, and we should congratulate these manufacturers. There are 4 specific manufacturers that provide both a Type 3 EPD and an HPD, which allows us to get under metal studs. I think you're going to get 5 products under the EPD category and 5 products under the material ingredient category, which means that in one product, before we even get started, we are already 25% of the way to getting ourselves a LEED credit. My next category is gypsum board. We now have metal stud wall. We got to put something on it. Gypsum board, again, have been leaders in this category. There are industry-wide generic EPDs available for glass mat sheathing products, for joint compound, and for Type X gypsum board. All three of those products are going to be in virtually every single project any of us do. Those are each worth half a point. We just got another 1.5 points in the EPD category. But once the generics come out, all the manufacturers follow suit. There are multiple EPDs available in multiple products. There are a lot of Type X out there, which is the fire rated, but that's the 5/8 inch gypsum board, which is what we use in most of our projects. 2 of those will allow you to optimize. They are that much better than the generic. They beat the generic requirements by 10%. So again, gypsum board, you're talking about getting more things. When I talk about the health impacts of gypsum board, my first step is to go to BuildingGreen's website, because they have such great information on health impacts on their BuildingGreen approved portion of their website. Excuse me. So if you go there on designer pages, you can see a lot of great information, and those are my selections generally for what I use for gypsum board in my projects. But I also wanted to dig in to see, beyond the fact that I think these are good products and I think that they're well worth using to just clean up our industry, whether we can get credits for these. Again, in the category of gypsum board, there's a lot of HPDs available, and there are HPDs available in multiple different for multiple different products. You can get HPDs for Type X gypsum board, which is your fire-rated gypsum board, for your shaft wall, for sound-insulated gypsum board, for impact-resistant gypsum board, and there's some products that are air cleaning. There's a bunch of different products. So again, you can get a number of different points in this category. The interesting thing here was I think gypsum board is sort of a thing. It's gypsum squeezed between 2 sheets of paper. And so it would seem to me that every single manufacturer would have the exact same list of materials, because goodness gracious, it's a thing. It's made the same way. But what I was amazed at is that they had a very different set of products. In fact, the one HPD that's on the left of the screen right now, that one has absolutely no LTP1s. All it has is LT uncs, and there's one BM3, which means using this product, you could optimize with this gypsum board. But the one on the bottom right didn't have the same stuff, and that really concerned me. And the one thing that really concerned me was the LTP1, which is an ingredient in the bottom one, which is sodium polynapthyl sulfonate. So the interesting thing was this. Sodium polynapthyl sulfonate, which is an LTP1, was in about half of the gypsum board HPDs I looked at, and naphthyl sulfononic acid formaldehyde polymer calcium salt was in the other one. And if you look at the roll that's on the top right of each of those screenshots, the roll is a dispersant. And I'm sitting here scratching my head thinking, what is going on here? And so I called my favorite expert, who is Brent Ehrlich at BuildingGreen, and he told me that, well, I knew this. He told me that sodium polynapthyl sulfonate is on the red list. Its CAS number's on the red list, but Brent explained to me that the 2 things, I'm not going to say that word again, they are both the same thing. They are just a different a different label for the same essential chemical structure, and those HPDs are going to be rewritten so that they're no longer available, and we cannot optimize for gypsum board. My point that I dug into this like this was for this reason. There was a great white paper put out by the AIA, Materials Knowledge Working Group, which both Nadav and I were involved with a couple of years ago, and it had a bunch of really great recommendations. But one thing you have to do is use recognized third-party documents, and do not claim to have expertise you don't have. I don't have expertise. I handed it off to somebody who has better information than I. I also talked to a toxicologist friend of mine, and I'm going to trust the HPD that I see at the third-party document until I see a different third-party document. It's not my job to analyze what's going on. It's my job to read what I can see online and move on from there. But basically, interior walls and gypsum board. This is my tracking sheet that keeps all this straight for me. And here's where we are with our tally. So for gypsum board Type X, you can get an EPD and a material ingredient credit using an HPD. You can also get one for gypsum board mold tough kind of products. For specialty products, there is 1 EPD available. I think there's at least 3 material ingredients available. And then for Jack glass mat sheathing, you can have a generic EPD. There's an HPD available under glass mat, And for joint compound, you can get a generic EPD. So now we are at 9 EPDs and 11 material ingredients. Let's keep going. Insulation. This is another category that I don't think I'm going to have architects boss me around about what they want to use. There are numerous, so that's why I think it's a good thing that we can start talking about setting up base documents and setting up base strategies for your office to help you to just find things and find your way to getting these credits and not have to waste a lot of time on them. There's a number of different types of insulation. There's blown in, there's various batt products, and there are foam boards. That brings up this is a great document, and I wanted to just share this with you guys. If you put, does this item count as a product, USGBC, into Google, this thing will be the first hit that you see on your screen. You can download the PDF. It's very handy. Basically, it's very helpful to understand the different function and different manufacturer all key into different products. And also, if it's an assembly that's assembled on site, if it's assembled on site, everything that is put into it is a unique product, all right? So that's a very helpful thing. And clearly, two different functions would be two different products. And that's what we're talking about now with insulation. The first thing I think about from insulation is the R value per inch. And clearly, the foam products typically have a higher R value per inch, which is why we like to use them so much. If we're talking about the foams, the polyisos have generic EPDs available. That's put out by PEMA, which is the Polyisocyanurate Insulation Manufacturers Association. But also, once the generic's out, then we see other folks coming out. There are also XPS insulations out that have product-specific EPDs, as well. There are also product-specific EPDs for polyisos as well. From a health and material ingredient standpoint, there are a lot of declare labels available. There are a lot of HPDs, and there are cradle-to-cradle material health certificates available for rigid. The one thing that we also want to consider now, Building Green had a great article. I think it was like last week. Brent wrote it, my good friend Brent, and about how now the polystyrenes have insulation that are now HBCD free, which is a long word I am not going to tackle, but these are flame retardants that we are trying to avoid. We want to put that information into our specs because the same guys that have EPDs and HPDs, it's the same manufacturers that you can see Dow and Owens Corning are now bringing this stuff to market. And again, this is the pressure that we're all putting on them to say we want better products to choose from. The result is that we're getting better products. These folks are delivering better products to us. So for insulation for rigid, you have a number of choices that you can choose that you can hit all this on. You can get generic and type 3 EPDs, and you can get both HPDs and cradle-to-cradle disclosure labels. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was mineral wool. And the first thing I want to say about mineral wool is I want to put this chart up. There was a great study done. It was funded by one of the mineral wool manufacturers, but we shouldn't poo-poo it because it was done by Building Science Corp. It's John Straub. And what they basically found was that polyisocyanate does not function really well during cold or warm temperatures, which I think is really funny because, as we all know, the ASTM test, ASTM C518, is done at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is funny because 75 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty much the one temperature that it can be when you really don't need any insulation, but that's when they test the efficacy of insulation. And as you can see, the blue line on that chart is polyiso. The red line is Roxol. And as it gets colder, the R value per inch of polyiso decreases. And when it gets warmer, the R value of polyiso decreases to the point of when it's 25 degrees Fahrenheit outside, it's almost a tie. So what I tell teams all the time is if you are just trying to meet the energy code by using ComCheck, fine, you can use polyiso. But if you're actually trying to produce a net zero building and you're planning on testing your performance, your polyiso in the wall might not be performing as well as you think it's going to perform, and you might have a problem meeting that net zero requirement that you're trying to hit. I'm a huge believer in mineral wool and a cavity wall. It performs fine. There are plenty of brick ties or other metal attachment devices that'll get you the extra inch you need to get to make sure you meet your R value that's required by code and for what your performance requirements are. But so if you're looking for this, I mean, this information is publicly available, but this is great information. And actually, after the study came out, about 3 months later, PEMA, who are the trade association for polyiso. Literally in their publicly available information, they took polyiso down from 6.7 per inch to about 6.2. And I decided it was a direct result of what this study had said. Anyways, I think polyiso is very inexpensive. I get it. It's a very efficient insulation. It's not the be-all and end-all. Mineral wool is a great insulation. There are no EPDs available, but there are many declare labels available. There are also cradle-to-cradle material health certificates available. And if you think about in the same, I'm not going to get into bad. I've covered mineral wool. Bad insulation, there's a ton of really great stuff available. There's also insulation in other kinds of bat. You have denims, you have wools. There's a bunch of really wonderful insulations in this category. And then the last thing is there's other insulations we need: acoustic insulation, some loose fill insulation. There's no reason in your insulation spec you should not be putting anything in there that does not have full disclosure labels and is environmentally sound. You only need 3 choices. You have 3 in every single category. We need you to just tie this thing down, and then you're good to go. You might notice I haven't mentioned spray foam. I am not a big fan of spray foam, mainly for a number of reasons, mainly because it's made of isocyanate, and that is it is a product that has a skin and a lung irritant, and that will be why the individual installing the spray foam looks like that when they show up on the job site, and they want everybody else cleared out. I'm not a fan of spray foam. I know people think it's an air barrier as well, unless if you lay it down in 1.5-inch increments and put 5 layers down, then it's an air barrier. If you lay it down quickly, which is what a lot of folks will do, it's basically going to be an air barrier to get you through your air barrier test, and then it's going to crack. And again, if you're looking for long-term performance, it might not perform for you. So insulation, if you go through the insulation here, I gave you one credit in each category for extruded poly, because you're going to have perimeter insulation under your slab or at your foundation wall, typically on every job. I gave you polyiso because you're probably going to have that on your roof. I gave you mineral wool because I'd like you to have that in your cavity wall, your exterior insulation. It's great as a continuous insulation. I gave you bad insulation because there's probably going to be some of that between your stud wall. And I gave you acoustic board because you're going to have some other stuff as well. All right, what else? I love this picture of the Kern Center because it says everything you need to know about material selection. Stop choosing so many materials. If you're all sitting at work, under your feet right now is likely carpeting, and under that carpeting is likely concrete. And what's wrong with the concrete anyways? There's some beautiful concrete polishing products that are available. If we use those in our hallways, in our back of house spaces, in some of our letter duty spaces, it's a great solution. This is a beautiful picture because you can see everything the building is built with. There's not a lot of, there's no ceilings, everything's exposed. But I know I'm not going to convince you of this. Probably. Hopefully I can convince you. You're going to have to put some stuff in. So let's see. I wanted to get us to 20. If you use concrete sealer, that is a no-brainer. You're going to have that on every single job. There are numerous HPDs available for concrete sealer. Polished concrete, again, polished concrete is a system that uses multiple products. You're going to need a densifier. You're going to need a grout filler. You're going to need a couple of sealers. I gave you 2 on that for material ingredient. Flooring adhesive. If you're going to put anything in your building, some carpets, although we like to put those down with those removable pads, carpeting, any of the vinyl floors or any of the rubber floors, base, all that's going to need an adhesive. Those things all have cradle-to-cradle gold certificates. Yes?
Hey, Ann, this is Nadav. I'm going to jump in for a minute because we had a question, somebody who might be having trouble following, and so I just wanted to clarify. They're asking, what does half of an EPD mean? What does it mean?
Half of an EPD. Half of an EPD is a generic industry-wide product. So when you have joint compound that has the Gypsum Association of America is giving you a generic EPD that covers all joint compound made in this country, as long as they go by this requirement, that gets you half a point.
So that's really the key. I think that's the key point here. Is for the lead credit, you need to get to 20 EPDs. If you use an industry-wide generic one, it counts as half of one of those 20, not a full one. So that's where the half comes from. Is it's sort of half of a credit towards your 20 total.
And I'm going quickly here, and I'm running through fast. But the point I'm trying to make is these credits, these 2 credits, these 2 disclosure credits, these are the bike rack credit from LEED V4. These are not hard. You just need to come up with a strategy. And this will be your screenshot if you want to take a screenshot. But this is your hint for where you're going to go looking to find this stuff. You only need 20. You need to find things that are compliant with LEED, and you need to make sure that in these categories you tie this stuff down. But this people get so scared of this, and it's not scary. It's very, very much doable. And when you're talking about such generic things as gypsum board, metal stud, and insulation, you're going to have it on every single project. And I haven't even covered whole areas. There's other places like carpeting and paint that there's great products available. If you pick the right manufacturer, you're probably going to get 10 paints that meet these requirements. And 10 paints, well, you have to pick 2 different manufacturers because you only get 5. But there's a bunch of great things available. Don't be afraid of these products. Don't be afraid of this credit. And also I want to make a point that we have to keep pushing, because the fact that we've been asking for 4 years is why this stuff is here. And we're now starting to get solutions. So now we can sort of solve the problem of the metal studs that are going to kill us if we actually install them. And the gypsum board, that every kind of gypsum board, no matter how you structure it, every kind of gypsum board is going to have some sort of LT1s in it, which are toxic materials. I did want to spend a second on VOCs. This might be another screenshot. This is my cheat sheet for how to deal with low emitting. And what I'm doing here is I'm upside downing it a little bit. I'm so used to seeing interior paints as a category and all the stuff you have to do, and then interior adhesives and all the stuff you got to do. What I'm doing now is I'm saying here is the compliance document, and here's where it applies. The reason I'm doing this is the CDPH, which is the California Department of Public Health, the CDPH document, that covers everything. It covers paints and coatings, adhesives and sealants, flooring, ceilings, walls, all the insulation, and it covers if you're at a living building, anything that's an interior product, anything, okay? Living building takes it down. And the key piece to remember is Green Guard Gold. If you're Green Guard Gold, you comply with CDPH, which is a really good shorthand to keep in your head. Now, if you aren't Green Guard Gold, you still might comply with CDPH, because there's other ways of showing that you comply with CDPH. But to keep in mind that Green Guard Gold means you comply with CDPH is critical. You have to remember that the no methylene chloride and that other long word, that covers both paints, coatings, adhesives, and sealants. And then you have to keep in mind the SCA QMD rules. There's one rule for wet applied paints and coatings. There's one rule for wet applied adhesives and sealants. And then there's all this kind of mushing together. So LEED is covered by 1113, LEED and red and LBC are covered by 1168, and then CARB 2007 is how you cover composite wood, and you can maybe cover wet applied paints and coatings, and it all kind of overlaps. BIFMA is the last thing, that's furniture. I want to say 2 more things. Wet applied. I've been struggling with this for the last 3 weeks. I know that some things look like they're wet and they're applied on site, but wet applied only covers paints, coatings, adhesives, and sealants. It doesn't cover everything else, okay? It's just those 4 things. Also, at the very bottom of the page right now, inherently non-emitting sources. That is the paragraph that comes out of the LEED reference guide. It's really important that you get that in your head. Don't waste your day looking for anodized metal CDPH compliance. You're not going to find it. Anodized metal is inherently non-emitting. They don't have to waste their money getting that compliance. Also,
actually,
if I could just point out to you, go ahead.
That paragraph is right in the credit language now as well. They may have added it.
Yeah, it's right in. Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. That's very important. That's just keep that in mind. All right. Next slide. How we can help. Okay, I have been doing this now. I've been doing this my business for about a year and a half, and we've been working with Nadav on a couple of projects. We can do a couple of things. I can review specs. I can write specs. You can write your own specs, but I wanted to make a couple of points for my strategies for spec writing about what are critical things to do. You have to get it in your spec. I know spec writing for some people is frustrating and it seems hard and scary. It's a very large book, but you got to get the information in. If you don't get the information in, you're not going to get it in the job. Click. Division 1, nobody likes Division 1. There's a bunch of key pieces in there, and my big piece of advice right now is under Well Air 25, which is the toxic material reduction credit, which is now materials X10 as of last week in Well version 2. All of that stuff belongs in product requirements. That's a Division 1 requirement. You want to make sure you get product charting, product data forms into Division 1 so you can get this information from your contractor. But also, this is the middle topic, it drives me crazy that these manufacturers have Living Building Challenge compliant products and it's a secret. So on your screen is the letter from Technical Glass Products saying that Firelight and Firelight Plus meet red list requirements, living building requirements. Firelight Plus is the fire rated glass that can be less than 100 square inches, so it's a 3 by 33 inch, little long rectangle in your fire door you put in. It's non-heat resistant because it's smaller than 100 square inches. It is Living Building Challenge compliant. I don't know why that's a secret, but the only way you figure that out is if you ask the manufacturer for a letter. So click. What we have to talk about are submittals. There are two kinds of submittals. Action submittals are things the architect has to take action on. They have to stamp them and say approved, approved as noted. Informational submittals do not require an action by the architect. So they're just for your information. Click. Informational submittal you need to put in your documents is I want to know building product disclosure requirements. Specifically, provide documentation confirming no red list chemicals are present. If you do that, if you put that into your document set totally, you can start collecting this information. You can collect it and put it over in a pile. It's an informational submittal. You have to take no action on it. You pile it up, and then this summer, you hire a very nice high school student to come in and figure out and get all this stuff organized into an Excel doc. Probably the high school student will know about some app that can in some way do that automatically. So it's easier for them, easier for you, and you get this huge database of information all stored and ready to go. That's where you can then go and look for your better materials. But you have to ask. That's the critical piece. Performance requirements, you need to put those in as well. And those go into in just about, we want building product disclosure information for this job. And click. And the last thing is payment procedures. You have to tell the contractor you want this tracked, and you need that information monthly submitted with their payment request. If you tie this to cash with a contractor, you will get their attention. Click, and that's the sentence you want to put in. Provide the environmental product data submittal form each month with your payment request. Click. That's it. That's on my website. Go to longgreen.specs.com, top right corner, resources, Green Engineer, which is where I kind of grabbed this, and I think my version's better, but we could discuss that later over drinks. It's on their website as well. It's in a couple different places, but that is available, or you can make your own. But the notion is that the contractor gets this as an Excel doc. They use this in this way they used to track recycled content. They use this to track what they're doing, and they're good to go. Click, you're up, Nadav.
I'm going to just quickly walk us through some resources that are out there to find products that meet these different requirements. Some people hopefully know about the Mindful Materials program, which is now built into Giga Origin database. And this is a great resource for finding products that meet a lot of these specific requirements. You can filter and search on a lot of these different options and find products. There's both within Mindful Materials proper. You can also go to the Giga Origin database and find a larger set of products that might meet the requirements but haven't been vetted by the Mindful Materials team, of which we're a part. UL also has their own products catalog, and you can go in and filter by products that have certain certifications or meet the requirements of certain programs. This is great, especially for EPDs, because UL actually produces a lot of the EPDs for companies, but they're also tying into some of the sources for other kind of products as well. So those are aggregators. Those are databases that are trying to aggregate products from a bunch of places. You can also go right to the horse's mouth. For example, for health product declarations, you can go to the HPD Collaborative website and look. They have their own database of all the published products, the repository it's called. Declare Products has a great database now, and you can search for different types of Declare labels, including there's a really useful filter on there for Declare, just show me Declare labels that actually meet the requirements of LEED version 4, because due to some weird technical reason that we don't have time to get into right now, not all Declare labels, most but not all Declare labels count towards the LEED v4 point. So that's something you want to pay attention to. And Cradle to Cradle is huge in LEED. They're a big part of these other programs as well. And they have a registry as well. So you can go right to the programs themselves, or you can go to some of these aggregators. We at Building Green have partnered with Designer Pages, which is an online library of products. And we're not at this point trying to aggregate all of the LEED related information you might need. I think Mindful Materials and UL and others are doing a great job of that. But what we do here is we provide collections of products that we have vetted and filtered and determined from an overall, taking all of these things, all 4 of those quadrants I mentioned, all the information we can find on all of that into account. These are the preferred products that we have in each of these categories. And we also have some collections of ones. The ungreen one you can see there. We also sometimes have collections of products that we unprefer. We've been working closely with Anne, as she mentioned, to do this vetting work for architecture firms, for owners on their projects. And we are happy to help you with it on your project. If it feels like the kind of thing you could use our help with, we can certainly save you a lot of time. We can reduce your costs. We can help make sure things meet your requirements, and we can provide you at the end of the day with your own tool that you can then reuse and take into future projects as well. So please reach out to us if we can help you with any of that. And we at this point have just a few minutes left for questions. So Anne, I don't know if you've been looking at the list that's accumulated. We can pick some off here and try to address some of these questions. Do you want to pick one and start?
You want to pick the hardest one? Has Anne seen the issue? Oh, wait. Yeah, Type 3 EPD is only indicating compliance with ISO 14025 and not ISO 15804, ISO 2. You heard about that last month at Living Future, right?
That's right, and it was from David who asked this question, so he's following up with us here.
You know, David, when I was in the MRTAG meeting right after I saw Nadav, and Annie Bevan was sitting there, and she's now working as staff at USGBC, and she was swearing up and down that wasn't going to be a problem, and she thought that was a reviewer issue, and she was going to take that back and ask about it. So I haven't followed up on it because it hasn't directly affected me, but if you wanted to follow up with Annie, that would be one option, if you need contact information, you could reach out to me and I can get that for you. But I think that is a reviewer boo-boo that I believe it sounded, Annie was like, no, that's not going to be the issue. And so but I don't know. I've heard about it. I don't have any additional information about it.
So, and the other thing, David, I've been looking at these since you pointed it out as well, and it turns out that newer EPDs pretty much all meet the ISO standard. And those ISO standards, the 15804 and the 21930 are, well, one's an EN standard and one's an ISO, are actually about the PCR. They're about the product category rule that governs the EPD. So it's whether or not the EPD was produced under a product category rule that's compliant. And so newer EPDs all seem to be at least stating that they're conforming with that. It's the older ones you have to watch out for. Let's move, and there's a really interesting question here about, is it 5 products per manufacturer, or is it 20 products from at least 5 different manufacturers? Because those are 2 different things. And so
I know,
Christy
and I've always thought that it was use at least 20 different per million, from at least 5 different manufacturers. I always read that as a limit, but you bring up a very good point. Yeah, as long as you have 5 different manufacturers, you could have 15 from one, and then 1 from 5. You could have 16 from one, and 1 from 4 others.
And we should give credit where credit is due, assuming this is true. Somebody has posted here that the spreadsheet that we showed is actually from ZGF originally, so could be.
All right, that's fair enough. Okay. No.
And then another question I'm seeing that I think is interesting is there's a lot of people are running into this challenge of the overlap between the need for EPDs and HPDs and the low emitting materials credit. So metal studs, gypsum boards, if you're going to get the low emitting materials points, they also need to conform with the general emissions requirement in the low emitting materials credit, right? The CDPH.
Yeah.
So, so that's something to watch out for. We need to make sure you get that documentation. And somebody's also asking, what about items like electrical wires? Do they need to comply? Electrical wires seems like that's getting pretty in the weeds, but do you have any experience with that?
The electrical wires, you're going to hit your head on well with that. The well credit, well has a bunch of the electrical wire requirements up now, and that there's the phthalate piece, and there's a whole bunch of things that are going to come in play there. But electrical wires for CDPH? I don't know the answer to that one. Interesting.
I just want to mention that someone else has posted, they've also pursued this issue of the PCRs, whether they're compliant with 15804 and ISO 21930. And this is Karen Jocelyn says she's reviewed it with GBCI technical staff, and they say if an EPD is published by one of the programs, it is assumed they did use the required format and standard. This will not be an issue. So I assume she means that they should not hold you to those requirements for the PCR, which means, David, whoever the reviewer is who did, I'm not sure what the path is to go over their head and see about getting that reversed, but it sounds like that's not what people are saying should have happened. Ralph was pointing out that wiring also comes into play, of course, with Living Building Challenge. Wiring is going to be a big deal there. And Karen also has a comment about the 20 products from 5 manufacturers thing. And because someone else is asking about that, we need to clarify. So we will work on getting, if we need any further documentation on this, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that you're not limited to 5 products from a manufacturer. The limit is that you have to have at least 5 different manufacturers.
All right, that's interesting. All right, that's cool.
And anything else you want to pick up on from this list in the minute we have left?
No, I'm just, one thing, somebody brought up expiration dates. One of the problems that the expiration date for the documentation, as long as it's in the realm of when the construction is going on, I believe that we talked about that in the tag last year, and I believe they put something in about as long as the expiration date, as long as the document was live during the construction, it doesn't matter if it's live at the end of construction. The theory being that it was live when it was installed, because these things have really tight expiration dates, and one thing that I'm finding frustrating is a lot of them are expiring as you watch. Cradle to cradle is a 2-year expiration. And HPDs are 5-year expirations, but they haven't been around for 5 years yet, so they're going to start falling down. So other thing to remember, last thing I'll leave you with, there was a CIR put out that is in the USGBC database. You can show optimization with EPDs if you show this product is better than the last product the manufacturer did. And one interesting thing that's going to start happening is as these EPDs start expiring, which I think is going to happen shortly because of they're like 3-year or something, and they've been around for about 3 years. As they rerun their EPDs to get them back in play, if they can show that the performance in this EPD was better than the performance in that last EPD, that is an opportunity for optimization points. So keep that in mind and talk to your manufacturers about old versus new EPDs.
And I'm going to try to sneak in one last one here. Somebody in the very early on asked about the BPDO cheat sheet with the matrix of the 3 credits and the 2 options, whether there's been any changes in terms of likelihood of achievement since that was originally released 6 or 8 months ago. And the answer is no, that's still pretty much the situation with those credits. Stay tuned for lead 4.1, might really change that. So with that, thank you very much for joining. Thanks for the great questions. And we will be back with more great programming for you before too long. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for doing this with us.
Thanks, Nadav. See you later.
Bye-bye.